Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Matt from Matt's Bookshelf, and today I'm doing my mid-year wrap-up for all the books that I've read so far. Rest assured, they are mostly classics, and so far in 2022, I think I've done a good amount of reading, and I've read a good share of great literature. So starting off with F. Scott Fitzgerald, Tender is the Night. F. Scott Fitzgerald is one of my favorite writers of all time. As I've said countless times in my videos, he's a huge inspiration for me as to why I found my love for classic literature. And Tender is the Night represents his last completed novel. And I read this. This is the first book I read in 2022. Really excited to read it because I love Great Gatsby and I love The Beautiful and Damned. And I think This Side of Paradise is just kind of okay. I would say Tender is the Night ultimately is sort of in between the greatness of the aforementioned two and the weaknesses of the latter, that being This Side of Paradise. This book has a lot of great elements to it. It has great prose, as you expect from every single F. Scott Fitzgerald novel, and some good character work in moments, but I don't think it's as impactful for me as The Great Gatsby and The Beautiful and Damned were. This Side of Paradise, which was his first novel, suffers a lot from plot elements kind of happening as like the author's life goes by. So, you know, he's writing about things that are happening in his real life, only fictionalized, and he's incorporating the novel, which causes the novel to feel kind of confused at times. And the same can be said for Tender is the Night. There are a lot of things that build up. I feel like in the first half, they don't really pay off in a satisfying way in the second half, because it does ultimately feel like it's just following what's happening with F. Scott Fitzgerald in his life, and ultimately I was kind of confused at moments as well. The Beautiful and the Damned follows some of that as well, but I feel like it's just so much more brutally honest, that book is, so it didn't bother me as much. In fact, I love the book, but Tender's Night is ultimately worth it, and I think it's something I could enjoy more as I get older and as I reread it. But as for a first read, I was a little bit of a mixed bag for me. I was expecting a lot, I should clarify. Like, I was expecting, the bar was very high for this book, and at times it did live up to it, but I was just waiting for it to take that next extra step for emotional attachment for me, and it never quite got there. Next up, I read The Hobbit, J.R.R. Tolkien. Everyone knows what this book is. I'm doing a book club where we're reading Tolkien's work, and The Hobbit was the first on the list. Whenever I gave away my accent with the way I say The Hobbit. But this book I read in my freshman year of high school, which was 10 years ago, because I read it in preparation for The Hobbit, the Unexpected Journey movie, which is coming out, and I loved it then. And as I reread it, I can honestly say that it did not quite capture the magic that it had for me the first time. It's good. I mean, if you're more of a fantasy fan, I can understand why you would love this book. For me, it just, as someone, I like fantasy books with complex characters, which is, like, I don't love A Song of Ice and Fire because it's fantasy. I love it because the characters are so rich, and The Hobbit doesn't really have that. It has rich lore, which, lore is cool for me. Like, I like lore, but it's not, like, a selling point for me in a story, and ultimately I just wanted more out of it. Like, I know it's not trying to be, like, a psychological drama or anything, but I just wanted some more, like, interactions and dynamics between the dwarves and everything. It does feel like it's a kid's book, and although I can turn my brain off and enjoy sections, I ultimately thought the reading experience was a little hollow for me, which is blasphemous, I understand, but I respect it. I can respect it for what it did in the genre and the literature as a whole, while also saying that a lot of it feels kind of dated for me and not something that I will be rushing to reread anytime soon. One of the things that I will be rereading probably very soon is something I'm very enthusiastic about. It's The Lighthouse, Virginia Woolf. I did a video on this, so if you want my full thoughts, watch that video. This book is maybe the best book I've read this year, and one of the best books I've read of all time. I'll just go with that. The prose is probably the best prose I've ever read, period. Virginia Woolf is a genius. This is my first Virginia Woolf novel, I should also clarify. And I was just reading this and consistently blown away by her ability to tell stories, by her ability to evolve themes without making it obvious, through the prose, through her ability to show the passing of time. I could go on about it again if I wanted to, but I'm not. So just watch my old video. It's only a couple months ago, so just scroll down my channel, you'll find it. But this is a fantastic book. If you have even the slightest interest in reading Virginia Woolf, just buy this book. It's incredible. It's amazing. Just read it. You'll have your mind blown. Next up is another fantastic book in my opinion, Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. I haven't read too many books from the 2010s, But I think this is 2013. I'm pretty sure this is 2013. But this is the best book I read from the 2010s and maybe even the 2000s and on. This is written by Hannah Kent, and it takes place in Iceland, and it follows Agnes Magnusdóttir, who is famously and historically the last woman executed in Iceland. And it's just a psychological drama. It's like a ruminative spiritual drama as well. It just is a really great story. I love books and movies and stories that tackle the where people dwell on like the existence of spirituality in a world that's so beautiful without it being preachy at all. It's just an analysis. It's just a paper basically on what spirituality is for someone whose life has been so miserable, and is there a god or anything, or is there a higher spiritual power? I said in my questionnaire, I talked about this a bit in my questionnaire video, but there's a fantastic scene in this book where Agnes has the right to talk to a priest regularly before execution to find some sort of spiritual redemption or vindication or something, and the priest's name is Toady, and when she's talking to Toady, she says, like, well, when I say God and he says God, we both have two fundamentally different ideas of what God is. So, like, we're having a totally different conversation. We might as well be using different words. And just watching these two characters interact, someone like Toady, who's had a more sheltered life, he's a priest, he's very religious, and he believes in his faith, wholeheartedly for the most part, versus Agnes, whose life has been miserable, and she sort of wonders, like, why would I even believe in any sort of spiritual power if my life has been this horrible? Like, is the spiritual power responsible for this? Is it indicative of the fact that is that we're just alive and then there's no one controlling us, there's no predestination? This book is phenomenal. I recommend it to anybody who wants to read it. It reminds me a lot of the movie Calvary, which shares very similar themes, because I just love stories that talk about, like, how spirituality can exist in this world today, and like seeing the two contrasting arguments fight it out is great. Next up, I have two Hemingway books, The Old Man and the Sea and A Farewell to Arms. It's been a while, I still plan on doing an Ernest Hemingway video, so I don't want to get too far into my thoughts on these two books, but I first read The Sun Also Rises last year, and it blew me away. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and since then I've been trying to chase that high with Hemingway of finding another book by him that I truly love, and I've read The Movable Feast and For Whom the Bell Tolls, and neither of those really captured it for me. And then I read Old Man and the Sea. This got very close. I actually really enjoy The Old Man and the Sea, and Farewell to Arms was a major step back. In fact, this is my least favorite Ernest Hemingway book. But I will plan on making a video on that at some point, so I don't get too far into my thoughts on it. But yeah, two Hemingway books. I'd recommend The Old Man and the Sea. I think it's really good. It's also really short, so you're not really losing too much time out of it if you don't end up enjoying it. Next up, Tacitus, the Annals of Imperial Rome. This book is interesting. It definitely gave me some insights on Rome I hadn't considered. It's good. I think that if you're getting into ancient Rome, like this period between... So, the Annals of Rome, the Annals of Imperial Rome covers Tiberius to the halfway through Tiberius' reign to, like, getting towards the end of Nero's reign. So it's not like the perfect book to start off if you want to get into like the famous era of ancient Rome, the transition between Republic to Empire. If you want that, I think Suetonius would be better. But if you've read Suetonius, I think Tacitus is probably the next step for you. He's definitely a Republican. He loves the Republic, and there are a lot of really beautiful sections in this book, especially the Death of Germanicus chapter. That's what the chapter is called. I'm not spoiling anything because you aren't aware. Germanicus is dead. But there are clear biases as well, and there's also theories that are fairly well proven that when Tacitus is writing about Tiberius, he's mainly talking about Domitian, who's the emperor while Tacitus was alive. He just couldn't actually say these things about Domitian because he'd be killed, and so there's things to take that as well. There's things to consider with that as well. It's a good book though if you are interested in ancient Rome. I would recommend it then. Next up is the book I'm most proud of reading this year, and that is The Recognitions by William Gaddis. I have a 40-minute video on this book. I actually talked for longer, and I could have talked more because I had more notes, but I cut it short at some point because I was just tired of talking to the camera. You can't even talk about this book. Anything I say about this book would be criminally understating it, especially in this shorter format where I just recap books that I read. It is a stream of consciousness has a stream of consciousness writing style, and it is sort of in the vein of Ulysses by James Joyce. Which I know Gaddis has said he did not read Ulysses until after writing this book, but the parallels are very obvious, and sometimes I kind of think that he's lying when he says that, to be honest. Maybe I'll do a video on that at some point, I don't know. But this book is such an emotional roller coaster. It is horribly frustrating. It is hilarious. It is sad and depressing, and it is enlightening most of all. I have sections from this book still in my head, and as I said with my Ulysses video last, it's this book and Ulysses where this individual copy itself I have an attachment to because it tracks my progress with the book, my notes, and everything. And as I learn, and as I have physical memories, basically me reacting to certain revelations in this book that happen. It is just an incredibly well thought out book. It took him almost a decade to write, and it just proves that we should be celebrating authors that take time to write their books and to make them as good as they possibly can be, because then you get books like The Recognitions, and it's amazing. I love it. It's great, and especially as someone who's trying to write and he's trying to break into the field, it just hits home in so many ways. But yes, watch my 40-minute video on it if you're interested, if you've read the book. And there's a non-spoiler section in the beginning. I make it pretty clear when I go into spoilers. But yeah, anything I just said now criminally understates the magnificence of William Gaddis' The Recognitions. And I have Wolf Hall, Pulitzer Prize winning Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This book, and this is actually the first edition as well. This book is praised to high heavens by anyone at BookTube who's read it, which gets to my controversial opinion when I say that I did not particularly love this book. I enjoyed it. I think it's good a lot of the time. It's just not... It is for me, because I love historical pieces, especially, England during this time period is awesome. And, you have King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn and Cromwell and all these iconic characters, all these iconic characters. And I think, first of all, second perspective... The writing style, I can't think of what the exact terminology for it now. The writing style took me out of it a bit. It took me a while to get into, but I did get into it eventually. But as I like books with not lavish, but I do like lavish books with long setting descriptions and character descriptions and stuff. And Wolf Hall doesn't really have that. It's very snappy. You get conversations. It's very much constructed kind of like a play to a certain extent. And although I did enjoy parts of it, I did find myself wanting more. I think there are some elements of this book that are, a little too subtle for me. I was reading it during a period where I had finals and I was bull rushing editing my book, so I had other distractions at the time, and so maybe if I read it during a calmer time in my life, I would get more out of it. But for the most part, I was kind of left wanting more ultimately, especially considering the hype around this book. So let's get into my current reads. Lord of the Rings, the whole collection. I finished A Fellowship, and I finished the first book of The Two Towers. And, from what I didn't, even though I didn't enjoy The Hobbit very much, The Lord of the Rings is just breathtaking. Utterly breathtaking. I would say I struggled with Fellowship up until the Council of Elrond, but everything Council of Elrond is just magnificent. Despite the hype this book has, it is incredible. The scene descriptions, he improved so much between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings from a character's perspective, from a writing perspective. It is just everything that I wanted out of The Hobbit and more, and I can't wait to finish this at some point. I've been distracted with other reads, but I'm a little more than halfway through with it now, so I do plan on finishing it. And this is my first time reading the series as a whole, and even though I watched movies countless times, I am enjoying the Lord of the Rings book immensely. It's one of those few examples where the movie has scenes that the book doesn't have that elevates the product on its own, and the book has scenes the movie doesn't have that elevates the product, the Lord of the Rings product as a whole. So they both are excellent, pieces of work, I guess, of creativity, the movies and the books. But yeah, even if you aren't interested in fantasy that much, Lord of the Rings, I think you can't really go wrong with, because if you have appreciation for great writing, this is literally 1,000 pages of great writing. I'm also reading Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. This is an expat writing book about a guy living in France. It's fictional, but it's heavily inspired by Henry Miller's life. I'm not going to go too far into my thoughts on this book because I'm going to make a video on it, but it is an experience. That's all I'm going to say for right now. And finally, I have Ronald Sims, The Roman Revolution. This is a book, historical history, covering the transition between Roman Republic to Roman Empire, written by historian Ronald Sims, who taught at Oxford. And as someone who studied this era of history for years, this book is blowing my mind, to be honest. It is covering things that I never considered before, perspective I never considered before. It is so well done. This book is not accessible for people who are unfamiliar with this era of history, but if you are familiar with the era of history, this is just perfect. This is amazing. Because it doesn't hold your hand through specific plot points. You need to know what happens during this era in order to get it. You need to know who the characters are in order to get this book. But if you are at that point, you can't go wrong with this. Ronald Sim first of all, he's an excellent writer. His word choice and his prose is phenomenal, and his ability to carry out his argument in the form of both, it's both an argumentative piece and a telling of a story, and the way he's able to flow back and forth between the two is really commendable. And he takes time to both describe the history and also get into the head psychologically of people like Cicero, Marcus Antonius, Octavianus, and it's just great. It's just great. Every time I get to a chapter ends, I see the title for the next chapter. I'm like, I want to hear what Ronald Sims' take is on this major event or this major character, because he's just unabashedly fierce. He's not afraid. He doesn't pull his punches at all, and that's so commendable. And I may not 100% agree with all of his takes. I agree with everything he says to a certain extent, but he is just willing. He's just putting it all out there, and he clearly did his research, because the Roman Revolution, just the way it tackles this era of history from a political and from a propaganda, from a psychological perspective, is so great. And despite this era of history being so overly discussed, Ronald Sim has amazing things to contribute to this discussion. So that is the end of my video. Let me know what books you read this year so far, or what your favorite books are that you read thus far. And if you want to talk about some of the books that I read this year, you can talk about it in the comments. And yeah, check out my friends Colorless Wonderland and Dronzo. And my next video, I don't know what my next video is going to be on, to be honest. Probably Tropical Cancer, because I just teased my thoughts on it, so I got to talk about it now. Yeah, so thank you and goodbye.